Hello, and welcome everybody back to another wonderful episode of the Unily Podcast. Let's meet our wonderful returning podcastees. Looking down the line, I'm going to go with the audio on my screen. It's nice and easy. Over to you first. Ian De Fiore, how are you doing?
Hello, Matt. My main man, Matt. How are you?
That's some good energy right there, Ian. I am doing well. I'm doing well. Did you have a good Christmas break?
I did. It was pretty short, but I am thankful that the work that I had ended about the week before New Year's. So thank you to my clients that were able to sign a few days early so that we all could enjoy the Christmas break.
Ever the salesperson signing contracts just before the festive season. That's awesome. Well, good. I'm glad you had a good bit of downtime. Well earned, of course. Busy 2022, and I'm sure 2023 will be equally chock-a-block for you. And may I say, it's great to have you back on the podcast. You've been a returning superstar now for a number of episodes.
Yeah, and I've actually had a few people. I remember when we did Unite, somebody was like, I know you from somewhere. I'm like, you do? And then they put two and two together, like, you're from the podcast. I was like, I'm so happy that somebody is listening. It makes me feel like I'm not just sending things out into the ether. So we see you, we love you, happy to be here.
There you go. Shout out for one lucky fan. Okay, so next on my list, the amazing, enigmatic James Noka. How are you doing, my friend?
Hey, what's up, everybody? Thanks for having me back.
It's good to have you back. How have you been? How's your 2023 kicking off so far?
2023 going okay. Was actually wondering, like, you were asking Ian, like, how was your Christmas break? And I'm wondering in my head, like, am I not on Christmas break anymore?
No.
I don't know. Mentally always on vacation, but here today.
We promise that the podcast doesn't get fed back to your manager at all. So
thank you very much. Thank you.
Keep that holiday mindset, James.
Hey. No matter where you are, always imagine you're on an island somewhere. That's what matters.
That's good. That's cool. Good. I mean, I guess it's like, that amazing phrase about your culture, work hard, play hard.
That's the spirit. That's how you get the drinks on the beach after the fact. And who cares if a little sand gets in your keyboard? That's all I'm saying.
Nice. Well, that actually reminds me of when we dialed in Mike from the marketing team when he actually was working from a beach. Do you remember that episode? Oh God, okay. Well, there you go. We're going to have to ask marketing to fly James out to a tropical island somewhere and dial him in for a podcast episode. That is on the schedule for 2023.
I'm with it.
Yeah, I bet you are. Good to have you back. Moving swiftly on, the amazing, the unstoppable Alex Gabelli. How are you doing?
I am not too bad, Matt. Thanks for asking.
Good stuff. How was your kind of festive season? Was it nice, relaxing, I hope?
I think I've said this before, and everybody thinks, well, why did you enter into this sort of agreement? But I have teenage children, so there was no relaxing, but it was quite nice. It really was. Every year I just run into the Christmas break and then just keep running, and then Christmas is over, and then I've had enough, and I run away to work. So.
Nice. That's good. I mean, I know exactly what you're talking about. That kind of, well, I don't know exactly what you're talking about because I don't have any children, but I know about the whirlwind family experience. Comes in like a hurricane over the festive season, shakes you up with you, reeling. But that's good.
I'm sure they all got, earfuls of just kind of, I sometimes forget who I'm talking to, so I'll just talk to everyone the same way. So I might be talking to you guys and I'm talking like this, and then I'll go and be talking to my family and I'm talking about work stuff, and then I go to work and I'm talking about family.
Nice.
Nobody's called me on it yet.
Blurring into one now.
It is.
Nice. Well, in today's podcast episode, we're going to be digging into some really interesting stuff. So I hope you're ready to bring all those insights, as I know you always are. But last and by no means least, we have the stylish, the super cool Kaz Hassan. How are you doing, Kaz?
Hi, Matt. I was wondering what intro you were going to go for there. They're getting better every time.
I know, and I've just realised I didn't give Ian one at the start, so it's just like burn on Ian.
Read between the lines.
Yeah, I'm so sorry, Ian. Next time you can have a really good one. I'll give no one any love whatsoever.
I just want a nicer dressing room, that's all.
We'll see if the podcast budget can stretch to it, no promises. But Kaz, how are you?
I'm good. We've just come off the back of our first in-person masterclass, which you were at as well. So still buzzing off that, and yeah.
Yeah, that was really good, right? Like, nice to be in person again. You know, and there you go, shameless plug for anybody who wants to get together in person. Cities around the world are being invaded by Unily intranet and employee experience experts, and now's your chance. Come meet us, or some of us anyway. But did you have a good bit of downtime as well? I know, like, end of 2022 was hectic, ramping up.
Yeah, I'm always like around doing stuff, moving around, travelling, so had a bit of normality, went back to family, but only for a few days, and then escaped.
Nice, that's so good, so good. Well, look, I'm sorry now to drag you all to the podcast after you've had your downtime, but I think it's a really good opportunity for us to get together and talk, because obviously, as we were looking at the end of last year, we were all talking both on podcasts, in blogs, but also just in our business about, you know, everything that happened over 2022, the state of employee engagement and employee experience. And we kind of made a few predictions and things like that for the year ahead, which is always good. But, you know, so much happened and there's been so much change around employee experience and what employee engagement means. I feel like the phrase employee engagement is almost kind of lacking clarity now more than ever, even though we're talking about it so much and there's so much focus on it. So I wanted to throw out this kind of like wild idea and just kind of discuss, you know, is employee engagement dead? Like, it feels like there's just so much unknown at the moment, even though we're focusing on it so much. What's the lack of clarity for me, I think, is becoming a big blocker for talking on the topic, you know, around in specificity. Anybody want to jump in? Gut reaction to the phrase?
I'll add a bit of context to that, which I think will be helpful, which is why I think it's interesting to pose that question. Is the latest Gallup research came out, which kind of showed the first sustained drop in employee engagement ever. So year on year, we've seen a drop on employee engagement, and that's been charting for, I can't remember, like a lot of time now. And over a period of the last 10 years, we've seen engagement increase over time, and then it dropped year on year for the first time ever. So despite all that extra effort on employee engagement, something's going wrong. So maybe it is dead.
Well, yeah. And so that's, do you know what? When we were talking about that statistic the other day, that's shocking. So we were actually saying, weren't we, that if we talk about raw interest in the topic of improving the overall employee experience, over the last 3 years, Google searches for employee experience has doubled.
Yeah.
So twice as many searches for employee experience on Google from probably all walks of different organizational structures. So we're all focused on how to make the employee experience better, a big part of which is to engage our people. Yeah,
it's over the last research. 10 years. Got my facts in order now. Yeah, so I think it's something like only 18% are actively engaged. So that's quite worrying. Yeah,
it is. And I think, you know, that is a really important question, because I think one of the first things like that you, I think, have to do in order to make a good case for the topic of increased employee engagement is you have to have a really clear definition of what that means, you know, within your business. And that can be really, really difficult, really challenging. I mean, Ian, let's talk about employee engagement and what it means to organizations today. Maybe this will help us understand why the research seems to suggest that it's falling. What do the organizations you're speaking to week in, week out say they think employee engagement is?
It's an interesting topic, mainly because, like we were saying at the outset, I think the term employee engagement is almost too abstract. So it can come to mean a variety of different things. It depends on, the distribution of their workforce. Like, are they mostly on production floors? Are they, in an office somewhere? I think when people say that they have low engagement, I think they're traditionally thinking about consumption of corporate news and communication and more of like the internal networking aspects of sort of the wider umbrella. But, if I were to sort of cut through what I hear versus what I think is actually happening, it's just generally like perhaps not a ton of trust between the employer and the employee. I think that there's concerns over like retention and acquisition, changing demographics related to, Gen Z entering the workforce and wanting to work for more purpose-driven organizations. So I think a lot of times what really these companies are trying to do is really demonstrate and showcase all of the great things that they're already doing and that they may not have communicated thus far because there wasn't really an emphasis or a desire for the employee to be in the loop on that, so to speak. So if you think about like charity or social responsibility, maybe there's like sustainability initiatives. Those are things that are, recent in the past decade or so and becoming increasingly important for the new entrants into the workforce. So that's kind of what I feel like is the overarching theme. I don't know, James, you're in on a lot of those calls. What do you think?
Yeah, I think you're hitting on something, and it's part of my personal belief. And what I hear when I speak to not just with potential clients and those organizations, but also organizations we might be partnering with that are doing this research on a daily basis, it's has to do with the complexity of the modern digital landscape, right? Over the last decade, so many different new systems were brought on that no employee knows the one place to go to get everything. So they're starting to withdraw within themselves, right? They're disengaging because of a sort of information overload. The New York Times was writing about this in the New York Times Magazine a few weeks back. The digital workplace is designed to bring you down. And it was an interesting article with a Georgetown University professor, but to boil it down to a point, it was like, you have to undergo so many context shifts in your daily life now to find this piece of information, that piece of information. I have to consume this content in this medium. I have to consume that content in that medium. That at the end of the day, I'm just withdrawing and not looking at any of it because I don't even know where to begin. And I think that's one of the great complexities of engagement now. And if it is dead, it's because it's downwind from experience and the employee experience is really poor. So I get why the trends are, that Google search we're looking at, everybody's focused on experience first, because you have to solve the experience problem before you could even begin to approach ways to improve employee engagement. And I think the trust bit that was you raised is a really good way to, focus in on that. Employers don't have a lot of trust with their employees. They're assigning, you have to look at this, you have to engage with this system, you have to report in that system. And it's all very dictatorial. The employees just, they have no say in the matter, no agency. They're going to withdraw.
I mean, so just before you go on, Alex, it's an interesting viewpoint. And I just as a reminder, I'm going to loop back on this one. Mm-hmm. There is I get the kind of advocacy for agency on the employee half, like of that kind of story. But I guess like part of it, like you mentioned around kind of, you need to read this, you need to report here. Like organizations do have to mandate some of that stuff, right?
Yeah.
So, maybe this is kind of like somewhat of the employee expectation, maybe rising beyond the realms of what can actually be delivered on in a real world work scenario.
Yeah. And we're observing that, aren't we? Like the younger workforce, the Gen Z workforce is looking for more of an alignment with their employer and the things they use in their daily lives. You know, it might not be the content necessarily. I might be worth unpacking that. It might be the channel through which the content is delivered, right? If you're getting it in an email, that's a 1990s, early aughts sort of thing. You want to get your information through a social style experience. You want to get it notifications to your phone. I might be mobile first. There is this notion, not to become that guy, and I will become that guy, but Marshall McLuhan's "the medium is the message." It's going to be how I receive this information is almost more important than the message that I'm trying to receive. So, you know, there's a lot of factors at play. There's not going to be a silver bullet here, but I think the baseline that needs to be addressed is what can we do to improve the employee experience because something isn't working.
Yeah. Sorry, Matt. What I was actually going to say was we're measuring these things. We're checking in with engagement. We're looking at it and we're talking about it and saying, oh, maybe engagement's dead because we've given everyone all these tools. And to sort of what Ian and James and also Kaz were saying, what I want to know is, but are you keeping up with the way in which you're measuring? Are you behind the curve on that? Because I suspect that's also the case. So let's just recall for a minute how fast technology moves, right? And how fast a lot of the population has been able to move with it, like really quickly. So if you're, you know, a couple of years ago, employee engagements, all the things. Okay, so we're going to do all this stuff to get our employees engaged, and we're putting these messages out there, and we're choosing the right channels, and we're doing all of that. But you know what? 12 months later, you need to change it up, and you need to be measuring that and ensuring that that first wave of engagement worked, and then sort of be ahead of the curve sometimes. So I've read the articles and I've looked at them, and I think I still have in the back of my mind, I'm thinking, okay, employee engagement, the way we first thought about it, might be dead. But what are we doing to make sure that we're keeping up with the stuff that we're feeding people? We are giving people this knowledge. We are engaging them. And then they sort of go, okay, got that, moving on. And then you're not opening up new channels, or you're not bringing things together the way, you know, James is referring to, or you're not moving forward and bringing them with you on that journey. So what happens is it becomes either overwhelming in its sort of just too much going on, or it becomes less interesting because I've done that. You're not bringing me new things. You're not trying to keep engaging me. It's almost like you brought me this stuff and then went, okay, we've done that piece now.
So what do you think is the most concerning factor then that we maybe have gone too far and doing too much? So we're not cutting through the noise and giving people
I don't think you've brought enough flexibility and openings for more of a two-way conversation. So as an employee, bring me into that conversation when you want to engage me. Because again, a couple of years ago, this was all kind of new, and we hit that big wave, which is why there was such a sort of peak in it. But now I take some of these things for granted. So what I want is for you to find out from me, well, what would engage me now?
Yeah, so that's almost like a third thing. So I'm thinking you're talking, James was talking about volume of content and the amount of information we're putting out being so much that engagement becomes overwhelming. So we disconnect, right? All these different mediums, formats, more channels than ever, as we've looked probably to counteract a bit of a period of uncertainty. Let's just, again, we'll just say it again, the pandemic, right? Uncertainty, how do you tackle uncertainty? You over-communicate. We've maintained that over-communication standard, so we're overwhelming people, so engagement is dead because people are overwhelmed. Or, I think the flip side of it, the kind of element that you were exploring there is, actually we're so used to getting really rich, engaging content now that, we always want to be led to the next thing, and we start to disconnect when there's not a constant stream. I personally, feel like, well, it's really hard to say, I guess, like which is probably the more driving force I mean, do you know what, Kaz? You suspiciously quiet in the corner here. Tell us, Kaz, is engagement dead? What's the answer? We just want to know. One sentence.
I think just yes, no. I think just listening to all of what was just said, it seems like there are like some trends that we can put in the bucket of employee engagement 1.0, which are things are not connected. Not considered. There's too much.
Employee engagement 1.0. I can tell this is going to be.
You see where this
thing.
is going.
This is going to be a thing. Okay, cool. Yeah. I'm
which
ready.
is like, we need employee engagement. Let's throw everything at it. Whether it's about volume, whether it's about free pizza, like cheap employee engagement, whether it's about not connecting the dots and understanding that person's experience. It's just not considered. It's not smart, but it's in the bucket of employee engagement. Meaning if we want and what we're realizing is when you just throw stuff in employee engagement, it's not intelligent and it doesn't get the outcome you want. And then I guess you then have to ask well, if it's not getting the outcome we want, what is the outcome we want? And so we probably need employee engagement 2.0, where we are thinking about how we're putting the dots together. We are getting employees that are engaged, but also a big kind of trend at the moment is we're seeing what's called like employee alignment, meaning that taking out some of the cheap engagement, like Pizza Fridays, means that sometimes people just stay and work for companies because there's breakfast in the morning, but actually they're not aligned with the purpose of the company. As Ian mentioned earlier about Gen Z want to work for companies that are making a difference and they feel aligned with. And that I would put in that second bucket.
That's a really kind of transformative way of thinking about like what you just described there as cheap engagement. I mean, I'm going to start ripping off your great ideas here, Kaz, and writing blogs and get myself famous for this. But cheap engagement, I think, is a great label for the fruit bowl, the classic fruit bowl scenario. But what I'd never actually connected before in my mind until this very moment is the concept that cheap engagement actually represents a business risk. So when you are doing, let's say you're like entering an awards submission, you against the whole market competition, who's going to be the top dog, top of the pile, best of breed for X? Do you want somebody who stayed around for the fruit bowl to be filling in that report? Or do you want the person who believes in your mission and vision to be the person filling in that report? So actually, like genuinely, it's a risk, isn't it? Right. So when we talk about that statistic about employee engagement constantly, falling, we're actually talking about the impact on the bottom line, right? Like it's a fundamental business problem, and almost like the cheap engagement tactics risk you keeping around the wrong type of people, which actually brings us full circle to Ian's point about transformation in the workforce by generations. So the new younger generations, I always get the generation labels confused, but I know that it's Gen Z who are like really starting to have an influx in the workforce now, more digitally savvy, increase in digital dexterity, but also higher expectation around alignment to mission, vision, and values.
Yeah.
Which I think is pretty crucial, right? Because it backs up that story that to get engagement with them as a type of an employee persona group, you're gonna have to focus a lot more on how you elicit that connection.
Well, I think that might be to Kaz's point, is if you're talking about alignment and you want to bring that new engagement, then it's understanding how to align with them. So as a young Gen Xer, so that was the first time I think a generation got named after the boomers. Doesn't count.
Yeah. Boomers don't count. Which does anybody here, just before we continue down this path, what age groups do we all fall into? Are people willing to say? What's the kind of like?
I think I'm the only one who's not a millennial.
Yeah, I'm a earlier millennial.
Yeah.
I think I'm like the last year of the millennials. I think the millennials.
What's the last year of the millennials? I've got to know now.
95.
95? Okay.
Yeah, 1995, I think is the last
Wait.
year.
I thought it went to like 2000.
No, I think they cut the line to start Gen Z at 96.
Yeah.
So what's 1990, dare I ask? What am I?
No, it's millennial.
Oh,
It's still millennial.
Oh, cool.
Yeah.
It's
Like 19.
young?
It's like 18 years. Yeah.
Yeah.
You know, it's a whole darn generation, bro.
Yeah. So I'm going to stay super vague because I don't want to tell you when Gen X starts and ends.
It's fair. Okay,
Sorry, Kaz.
Now that I've got that clarity, Alex, I rudely interrupted. You were saying?
No, I was going to say that my feeling is that we've done a great job of bringing that engagement, but again, it's perhaps the engagement decisions have been made by a particular group, and I think what we're doing is we're coming out of it and saying, you know what, I would like to be contributing to those decisions. I would like for you to align with what I find engaging, no matter what generation I'm in. And for each of them, it would be something different. Again, it's just, for me personally, I'm fatigued by people making the decisions about what they think I'm going to find engaging without having checked in with me to see if I find that engaging anymore. So that's kind of where, I mean, that might be that third option, which is, it is a lot of what you've already learned and you know, but now is the time to be smarter about it and check back. Are you still on the right path? Is each generation that you employ, is that the right direction for them? Are you aligned? Because again, I think it's a great point that Kaz raises, is it is about aligning, but you can't do that unless you understand what will enable you to do so. And you can only do that by speaking to those employees.
Okay, so that's what we're saying is like another issue, right, with employee engagement as it stands today. We feel like there's not enough of a feedback loop about, asking employees, how do you want to be engaged? What kind of content, really connects with you, resonates, that you're most interested in. So we're putting more content out, but not necessarily asking people what's important to them. Is that kind of would everybody agree with that as a kind of another reason why employee engagement is suffering at the moment?
I'd say, yeah. I think that over the last 10 years or so, we became so obsessed. That this is all corresponding with the rise of data-driven decision-making, right? And that data was all quantitative. That's the fad of the last 25 years, everything quantitative. And we've forgotten that the metrics that are being measured when we measure people are still people. So we've forgotten the individual that is part of the data set. Everything could have been behavioral analytics. And of course, this is painting with a broad brush, of course. Mm-hmm. But a lot of what was interpreted and analyzed was behavioral metrics. And it wasn't the quantity, if you will. It was checking boxes without, trying to fill in the answer with a more considered and thoughtful approach. And that goes back to that notion of trust. Without asking the employee what it is they want to see and how they want to see it, we are, by way of not doing that, inherently not trusting their input into the wider stakeholder groups of the organization. So we have to remember that the people we are communicating with are people. They have opinions, they have thoughts, they want to be treated as a unique contributor to the overall purpose of the organization. And if we are not going to do that in that style, then what other than their obligations by way of their job function do they have to weigh into the larger organization? Which, Matt, to your point, touches on that bottom line component. They're going to be the most everybody's going to be like Randall Graves from Clerks. They're just going to sit behind the desk and talk trash to the customer. They're doing their job, but they're not doing their job.
Yeah, it's an interesting concept. And I mean, I guess what you've described there in many ways is quiet quitting. I'm looking at Kaz now. I feel like he knows this topic. I think I've seen you talk about this before, right?
Yeah.
That's it, isn't it? It's like feeling a lack of sense of alignment to the business, which then elicits, I won't say a bare minimum response, but it's a show up and do your work.
Yeah, it's quite a transactional way of looking at it. It's like I will do my contractual obligation, but never go above or beyond. But yeah, it has a bit of debate as to what it exactly means. But yeah, it's kind of about fulfilling your contractual obligation to your company based on your contract, but not really. There's no passion there. There's no above and beyond. There's no extra sparkle on the work.
Sparkle, there we go. Now we've got we're starting to define now what employee engagement 2.0 means, and it means sparkle. That's one of the defining characteristics of employee engagement 2.0. I'd love to hear from you if you're watching this podcast episode right now and you've got a story about how you've elicited employee sparkle.
But it does I think it does matter, because there's a big difference in having an output of work to actually knowing what that work, how the work you're doing is making a difference, and that you care about it, and that I think that has a difference on the final output that you get. So
yeah, I've seen a few definitions of employee engagement before, which talk about a truly engaged employee. They offer the what is this? Mind blank. They offer nothing.
Waiting with bated breath over here.
I've remembered. If I start making crazy eye movements, it means save me. It's discretionary effort was the phrase I was looking for. This is going to be a good podcast. Yeah, so it's about eliciting discretionary effort, right? Which is where you get from the B- to the A+, right? That kind of a little bit extra, that sparkle, which just kind of lights up, the work that our employees do day by day, week by week. I think that's a really kind of good way of talking about it and how we reinvigorate it. And I also like the hallmark of achieving a really meaningful sense of employee engagement being predicated on actually speaking to our people. I think you're right. I think there's almost been this kind of transition, right, where uncertainty equaled, information overload to kind of increase clarity, which has then transitioned to, hey, by communicating more, people seem to be more engaged with what we're doing as a business. Cool. This is now the model for engagement. Pump out content, utilize every channel. And now we're kind of almost at a point of refining the rough edges around that. So, okay, well, actually, let's be more purposeful around it. There's another really interesting point as well around how the kind of volume of content we put out to try and engage our people, or, well, essentially, the point I'm thinking about is around the Prime Minister that resigned. Because you shared this story, I'm going to hand back over to you.
So, funnily enough, it also lands on the day where we've now had First Minister also resign on a similar basis.
For a similar topic, yeah. I know, it's like
Nicola Sturgeon, yeah.
Yeah, so it's do you know what the crazy thing about it is? And I know we haven't even told the story yet, but I'm already analysing it, which is maybe lots of people actually just haven't felt safe to do this, but there's almost a sense of relief now in people where they realise that actually this is entirely possible and many people support it. Anyway, so back to story time with Kaz.
Yeah, just the story is about Jacinda Ardern, the New Zealand Prime Minister, who basically resigned, and she cited, it escapes me now, but she said she didn't have enough left in the tank, basically, and that it was burnout, basically. But it's a really interesting story because no one obviously questions her passion, and it's kind of the first time something or someone at that scale has ever cited something like that as a reason for resigning. And we've just had this kind of Nicola Sturgeon thing as well, which the rhetoric was slightly different, but it's kind of along the same lines.
You're seeing, the signs. Yeah. And I guess that in of itself is a really interesting topic because nothing left in the tank is, I understand to mean burnout, right? You've pushed so hard for so long that you've got nothing left to give. That is burnout. We talk about that as a significant issue. And I think that that's the kind of thing, or something that I think we need to balance against our efforts to engage people, which is that in that effort to give them all this opportunity to engage, the information overload aspect of it, you know, across so many channels can be overwhelming, and it can contribute to that sense of burnout, where if the information, you know, if basically we just turn the engagement dial up to 9,000, it's just like churning out content, right? And we're not being targeted, we're not being personal, we're not, you know, trying to support individuals. We can just risk overwhelming people.
Yeah. I was going to say it's almost like I do think many of these organizations and those that are thinking about it should know that they've done quite well to get to this point. Like it's sort of like you've got from 0 to 60 in quite a short space of time. You know, a couple of years is not a long time to turn around the entire way in which you approach employee experience and employee engagement. But if you want to get from there to 100, you're going to have to, you know, shift gears a little bit. And it's like, here I am using car euphemisms. But anyway, it's fine because this is how I think about things anyway. But it's now is the time where you might have to do a little bit more shifting in order to keep that momentum going, but also to be able to go that little bit faster and become that little bit more engaging and that little bit more experience oriented. Because again, I guess what I'm trying to say is I don't feel like it's all doom and gloom. It's simply us highlighting that you do embark on a journey of continually changing, reflecting, looking at it, understanding and seeing what you need to do to keep things going forwards. And I think this would be for anything, but particularly employee engagement, because we get smarter and we get better and we understand more. So now we want you to shift with us and keep delivering the things that we care about and make us feel like what is important to us is important to you as an employer.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense.
Yeah, it's a big thing that we talk about with clients on our side too, is about how this is an iterative approach. So get started, figure out what works, what doesn't work. You know, and as Matthew had said, create those positive feedback loops where, you know, you may not be an organization that culturally is very heavy in communications. There's like specific things you like to communicate, but it may not be the main method through which you're keeping people engaged. That's okay. Everything needs to be contextualized based on the culture. And I hate to throw something in that's a little bit esoteric, but like Durkheimian of like symbolic interactionism of like, if you sort of are authentic with who you are and you put that out into the world, then people will naturally gravitate back to you. And that's what I think is what gives people that extra sparkle, as we were saying, to their work. You know, they really feel like there is an alignment, and it's not purely based on what is sort of the flavor of the month type of trends or, you know, thoughts around the world around them, so to speak.
Yeah. I think that makes a lot of sense. I had another question relating to the topic of whether employee engagement is dead as well. And I think like part of it, the question I have is, how much are employees responsible for their own engagement? And how much do we have to drive as an organisation?
I think just an early thought that came to mind is one of the reasons we have to ask that question is perhaps we've got people on our journey that aren't on the right train, as Seth Godin said at Unite. It's like one of the reasons is we've just onboarded people without the connection between them and the connection between the employee and the company. But the question is still valid, of course, because like I guess like from a communicator's perspective, you have to make sure, like, so for example, I know there are some companies that do an awful lot of great work in things like ESG or diversity and inclusion, but like it's siloed and it isn't necessarily communicated. And so I guess as a communicator, if you're a communicator watching this, one like an opportunity you have is to make sure that everything the company represents and does and believes in is as transparent and available as possible, so the employee can then make a choice, an informed choice. That didn't actually answer your question, but it just gave more
No,
information.
but I think in a roundabout way it does, right? Because I guess one of the bits you're pointing out there is actually, to a certain extent, we're responsible for our engagement because we should all be making a conscious decision to actively participate in the vision and mission of the company we work for. And if we don't believe in it, we can always get off this train.
Yeah.
Kind of.
That's what I meant.
It's obviously far more complicated than just switching to another train. But I mean,
especially in the UK.
I think that's the, and that's the, that's the kind of thing I was maybe pointing to a little bit, which is like, I also think that there's an opportunity when we talk about engagement to consider the natural impact of engaged people on those around them, and actually how, part of it is about when we have highly engaged people, how do we put them in situations where they can positively influence and affect those around them? How do we create networks which enable some of that natural, organic growth of engagement across the business? That's a really interesting topic, actually, because we talk about a lot about we're going to increase engagement and we're going to do it by activating our entire comms machine, and we're going to churn out this amazing video content. But actually, I think a big part of engagement, it's all about people, right? So I think one of the things for me, if we're creating employee engagement 2.0, one thing I'd put in that bucket is like, how do we use, human networks to buoy and spread the good word.
I mean, isn't that like what influencers are in a way? Not in the social media sense, but having people that are more tuned in to what is going on the ground and being able to feed that up, but also then feed that back down. I don't know if that's...
It's kind of like an evolution of the old school, right? So if we talk about the employee experience platform or the intranet as the home of the digital employee experience, which due to the rise of hybrid and remote working is almost like the home of the employee experience, you can almost drop the digital bit because we know it's hugely digital. But with that said, it's almost an evolution. We need to find a new word for it. Everything needs a new name, a new cool name for 2023. But it's an evolution of the intranet champion, right?
Yeah.
To spin up a new intranet. You'd have champions in different offices, but it's almost like you need, I was going to say like employee experience representative. That's really lame. I promise you people, any listeners still with us, by the next podcast episode, we're going to have a cool name for the next generation of intranet champions. We'll canvass you, have a live vote.
The influencer.
Yeah, nice.
Hey, that was the same thing I said. You just put a special emphasis on
Yes, I did. Because that's what makes it pop, man.
You know what? You put in the sparkle work on that one, so you know what? You deserve the reward.
The emphasis was everything in that. Okay. Well, look, I mean, it always shocks me how fast time flies when we do these podcasts. It's been a great conversation. I think we can say with a good degree of certainty that employee engagement is not dead. However, we need to radically rethink how we measure engagement within our organization and address some of those problems that we've identified over the course of 2022, 2023, where old habits are dying hard and we need to constantly be refining what we do to increase engagement, because clearly, some of the methods that we're going about right now are not working. But hopefully over the course of the next 12 months of podcasting episodes, we're going to unlock more secrets for you. That secret sauce for employee engagement success. Right,
2.0.
guys?
Yep.
100%.
It's a wildly large promise, but I've thoroughly enjoyed it. Thank you, James, Alex, Kaz, and Ian, as always, superstars. So good to talk about the topic of employee engagement with you again. And I'm sure I'll be welcoming you back to the podcast very soon. And hopefully you, our wonderful listeners, will come back too. Thank you very much, everybody. That's a wrap.